Well, it's lovely to be with you today, and great to be able to share with you. Welcome here to my garden in Norrell. Got some birds singing around me, and there's a cow not very far away from where I'm sitting here as well, just over the fence. So it shouldn't interrupt us actually, but who knows? It may make a noise, but it's anyway. It's lovely to be able to share this with you and to share some thoughts from this wonderful passage of John chapter 21. So as I was thinking about it, I was reflecting, how do you end a great film series or maybe a fantastic book? Sometimes it's a really difficult skill for writers to get right, isn't it? I don't know whether you were a fan of the Lord of the Rings films and that trilogy of films that was out a few years ago. And I loved watching those, but I must admit, I do remember the final film. You ended up thinking, when is this ever going to end? As they seem to be finding it very difficult to say goodbye to these characters that they'd lovingly crafted over so many years. Really, of course, TV programs famously. I don't know if any of you were fans of Lost. I remember watching that sort of a little bit later, and in a way being rather disappointed at the ending, or sort of rather controversial. Maybe a Star Wars. Again, that sort of idea, isn't it, of maybe a film series or a book or a load of TV programs that have gone on for a long time. Very, very difficult to end them, and so it's a real challenge for John's gospel, isn't it? For the writer here, for John to end his gospel. It almost seems as if he doesn't want to let go of the story of Jesus. Many people actually think that John 21 is a bit of an extra ending to the book, and you don't actually have to be a biblical scholar in one sense to be able to see why people say that. It feels as if when you read through John chapter 20 that you come to the end of the book. You have Thomas's extraordinary declaration of faith, my Lord and my God, he says, doesn't he, in John chapter 20 and verse 28, as he meets Jesus face to face after wondering whether it could really be right that he's risen from the dead. And it leads on to what clearly feels like an ending. When you read the end of John chapter 20, you read these words, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and through believing you may have life in his name. Of course, it's a sort of book ending, isn't it, of the beginning of John's Gospel, that great prologue that we read at Christmas usually, and here we are. You seem to come to the end of John chapter 20, and John is sort of tying up the loose ends and explain to us why he's written his book. But then you turn over and you find yourself in this sort of extra bit in John chapter 21. And I'm really pleased that John decided to write this extra chapter, because for me it's one of the most beautiful and poignant chapters in the whole Bible. It begins with the disciples deciding to go fishing. They've returned north and find themselves again by the shores of Lake Galilee, and go back, at least for some of them, to what they know best, to fishing on the lake. We're not told why they decided to go there, but as they are fishing, Jesus appears to them on the shore. First, of course, they don't recognise him. A common theme actually in the resurrection appearances, isn't it? That people don't recognise or always straight away who Jesus is. We think about the disciples on the road to Emmaus, or even Mary in that first appearance in the garden, which of course we read on Easter Sunday morning. Then through a miraculous catch of fish, they realise who it is who's there on the shore with them. And they share that wonderful barbecue breakfast with them, with Jesus on the shore of the lake. If there's one scene I think I'd love to have been a part of in the whole Bible, it would be this one. Gathering around, sharing breakfast together by the shore of Lake Galilee must have been an extraordinary experience, meeting again with the resurrected Jesus. This is, of course, all the context for our passage today that we've read right at the end here then of John chapter 21. After breakfast, Jesus draws Peter to one side and 3 times asks Peter if he loves him. Of course, the symmetry here is clear for us, isn't it? 3 times Peter has denied Jesus on that fateful night just a few weeks before. 3 times Jesus gives Peter the opportunity to reaffirm his love and commitment, and commissions him again, doesn't he, 3 times? Feed my sheep. It's fascinating to me how Jesus confronts Peter's denial in this way. He doesn't just sort of sweep it under the carpet, but he meets Peter and addresses it and deals with it and reaffirms, as Peter reaffirms his commitment to Jesus, so Jesus reaffirms Peter's call on his life. And of course, it certainly seems to work, doesn't it? We know Peter goes on to do extraordinary things in the service of his Lord. And then we come to this final and intriguing section. Peter turns and sees the person who is enigmatically called the disciple who Jesus loved. Many people think that this is John, the writer of the Gospel, and in fact there's good reasons for that, as we'll see as we come to read through it. That certainly is the writer of the Gospel. I guess it depends whether you think the writer of the Gospel is John as it's ascribed to him, as we'll see right at the end in the final verses of our passage. But so as Peter turns and sees the disciple, as it says, the disciple who Jesus loved, the beloved disciple, often thought of as being John, Peter turns to Jesus and says, "Lord, what about him? What's going to happen to him?" And Jesus says this rather extraordinary reply. Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me." So we read the rumour spread in the community that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" This is a disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them, and we know that his testimony is true. But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. And so John ends, finally, his wonderful gospel. Some people think this whole chapter, extra chapter in a sense, has been added to correct the rumour that the beloved disciple would not die. But it's Jesus' words in correcting Peter that really fascinate me. The beloved disciple, as I say, often thought of as being John, has his calling, says Jesus to Peter, and you have your calling, Peter, which in a sense, of course, we know Jesus has just given to him and recommissioned in him 3 times. So don't worry about what happens to him, Jesus says to Peter. You follow me. This is such an important truth for all of us in our lives. How often are we tempted to compare ourselves with others? If only I was like them, have what they have, could do what they do. And the cost of all this on our own sense of well-being can be enormous. Jesus says to us, don't fret about what other people are doing. You follow me. And you know, I think this can apply to our churches too. It was great earlier this week to meet with members of the PCC with you, to look at the opportunities that are there for you as we move into the future with Joe moving on. It was also really good on Thursday to be at Helen Chantry's licensing for St Mary's, of course, your neighbours. But as we look to the future for you at St Peter and St Paul, we want to be open to the opportunities that are there for you. And I was really encouraged to hear about them, all the different things that you're doing, the new building that's going on the Rolls-Royce factory, the schools that are there, the work that you've been doing across the parish, and how we might be able to develop all those in the future. Some really exciting and encouraging opportunities. So, if we apply, in a sense, this teaching from Jesus, not just to our own personal lives, but to the life of our church, I think Jesus would say to us, don't fret about what might be going on in other churches around. Do pray for them and work with them. But let's look together at what the Lord's call is for you and follow him. Of course, both Peter and the beloved disciple went on to do extraordinary things for Jesus, including writing this book, which we've just read a small excerpt from today. May the Lord also bless us as we seek to follow his call in our own personal lives, in the life of our church and of our churches. Amen.